Guys, I recorded a video way back when Resident Evil 9 was first unveiled at Summer Game Fest, and because I am who I am, it never got released. There's a lot of videos that I recorded over the summer that never got released, but that's okay, because now that the Game Awards have come and gone, we've gotten another look at the game. And the rumors were correct. The hype is alive because Leon Kennedy will be making his first appearance in a new Resident Evil game since 2012. He's been gone for 14 years. And with that, 2 of the core 4 are back in the new era of Resident Evil. And what I mean by that is the very clearly Outlast PT inspired, first person. Not that this game is going to be first person, but like the Mega Mycete era where we had Ethan Winters and everything. Because for as much as Resident Evil 7 and 8 were enjoyable, it was just kind of like they didn't feel like Resident Evil 7 and 8 because it's something completely new. And through retcons in RE8, you do find out that like the mold has existed for as long as the virus has, and that Miranda and Spencer knew each other way back when, and that it's all connected and all this good stuff. I don't care about that though, but Capcom very clearly still does, and that's why we're getting like what looks like one last game to wrap up this whole Mega Mycete thing, and then we don't really know. We don't know. Because bringing Chris back at the end of Resident Evil 7 was like a way to be like, yeah, it is still, like this is still the Resident Evil that you love. But because of that, he kind of had to be in RE8. But a lot of people, myself included, thought that he felt and acted very strange in that game. And then there's a cliffhanger with his character where he's gonna like go take on the BSAA or whatever they're called. I can't remember what it was, because like they were gonna drop bioweapons in the village, and so we don't really know what's going on with him and with that because they haven't mentioned it as far as we know for RE9. But I mean, it comes out next month, so it's either not going to be mentioned at all or it's going to be, a secret kept for the actual game. Will Chris be in this game? We don't know. And then there was the Shadows of Rose DLC. Most people figured that Resident Evil 9 would take place between RE8 and this DLC, because if we were going to skip that far ahead, that would put Chris, Leon, Jill, if she's still alive, Claire, if she's still alive, in like their 60s, and we can't really do that. But that is something that I kind of want to talk about, because we haven't seen Claire or Jill since before RE6. Like, it's been a long time since we've seen Leon, but like it's been even longer since we've seen Jill from the first game and Claire from the second game. Like, we are pretty sure that Jill's still alive, but we don't really know what's going on with her, And this game feels like it's a return to form in not only the fact that we're going back to Raccoon City for the first time, like this century it feels like, but also in the fact that we have 2 campaigns. We've got like our survival horror campaign where you play as Grace, and we've got our action horror campaign where you play as Leon. Leon's a fan favorite character. Bringing him back is absolutely the right move. It's the only one that really makes any sense. There was kind of like no way that, especially after the success of the RE4 remake, that this game was not going to have him in it. That being said, there is a big question hanging out of then what? What happens after RE9? What does Resident Evil 10 look like? Because the franchise has changed and evolved so much, and it is currently so different than what it had been. You do wonder, are we really dealing with the T-virus again? And if so, do we continue with that? Because we're now at a point in the franchise where mold turns people into werewolves and vampires. I won't say that Resident Evil has lost a plot or jumped the shark or anything like that, because if you were going to say that, you should have said it when the 3rd game came out and we had Nemesis. But it is like, have we over time gotten so far away from the core identity behind Resident Evil that we can't really get back on track, even though we are returning to Raccoon City and we probably are actually dealing with zombies again, because there's still so many central characters that are missing. Ada, Sherry, Rebecca. And it feels as though if we were to make a game or to get a game that focuses on those characters, it would strictly be for fan service. Like, maybe organically speaking, there's no way to get back to what we had with those characters and with the original way that Resident Evil had been unfolding, because Capcom has no interest in that. Maybe they don't want to give us Jill. They don't want to tell us if Wesker's still out there. They don't want to do any of that. Maybe they do want to just keep focusing on these remakes and this new direction that Resident Evil has gone in. And that's fine. I mean, at the end of the Resident Evil 4 remake, they show Wesker, who is obviously the main villain of RE5, so it's very clear that they plan on remaking Resident Evil 5. If so, do they remake Resident Evil 6? Because that poses another question. 7 was a return to form. It was a well, not necessarily a return to form, but it was like an adrenaline shot for the franchise. It was, the first time that Resident Evil had been taken seriously in a long time, because it was scary again. It was creepy again. It was good again. So, when we get there, what do we do? I think it would be absurd to expect them to remake Resident Evil 7, because that game came out in 2017, and the remake of RE5 is probably coming out in 2026, or not 2027 or 28. I think that's fair to say. But, it won't, or maybe by the time we get to the point where Resident Evil 7 takes place, it will be old enough for a remake. But what do you gain from that? What is the point of that? And going back to, where we are currently, does Resident Evil 10 turn out to be a reboot? Are we completely starting over with a new concept of Resident Evil in general? Are we going to go back to focusing on the core 4? Are we going to get completely new characters? Like, how do we go on? Because the main characters of Resident Evil are getting old. Chris and Leon are in their 50s. It's... How are you going to explain them still looking like they're in their physical primes? You could just not care, because Resident Evil is a very silly franchise, but I don't know. I don't think that that's the direction that they want to go. I really don't know. This entire thing is speculative, They could reboot. They could keep doing remakes all the way up until Resident Evil 8. Who knows? Because by the time they get there, maybe it will be old enough for a remake. I mean, it's already 5 years old, The first Resident Evil game got a remake after 6 years, so... It is hard to say. It's just difficult because there are still so many fan-favorite characters out there that are completely MIA. Chris hasn't said anything about Jill in the last 2 games that he's a part of. We don't know if Ada's alive. We don't know anything. I'm sure she will pop up in this game, because anywhere Leon goes, Ada goes as well. So a lot of it is kind of like we'll have to wait and see. Because, I'm looking past a game that's not even out yet. I'm sure that Claire might have something to do with RE9, because she is connected to Leon in a way. But Leon doesn't have any connection to Jill. I don't think they ever met. So, despite being cops in the same city at the same time during RE2 and 3, I don't think they ever met. So, it's like... It's very up in the air. Anything really could happen. But I would like to ask you guys the question. What do you think happens after Resident Evil 9? Do we just continue with a regular Resident Evil 10 that's about either the virus or the Megamycete or something else entirely, some new, mutagen that's turning people into creatures? Or do we reboot? Or do we do spin-offs? Do we do a completely Jill-devoted game, which is insane to say that a game about Jill Valentine would be considered a spin-off, but that's where we are now. Do we... get a whole new thing like we did with Ethan Winters, where it's just another character in another setting that has nothing to do with anything. Those are all viable options, because it's really all on the table. I'm sure that the only reason they put Chris in RE7 was because they weren't sure if people would be fully confident in the concept of a Resident Evil game that had nothing to do with any of the previous characters before it, right? You know, nobody that you played as an RE6 or 5 or 4 is playable in this game. So what do? We give the people a connection to RE5 or 3. Or not 3, Code Veronica or 1, you know. Whatever game you associate Chris with the most, we give you a through line to that. But maybe they don't feel like they need to do that anymore. Maybe they're fully confident in the direction that Resident Evil is going in right now, and if they do choose to do a completely new thing about a completely new character, they don't need to connect it to the previous content at all. But whatever you think that they're going to do, I would love it if you tell me in the comments, and while you're down there, leave a like, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys next time.